It is the best of times, it is the worst of times. We live in an age of comfort, convenience and promise. A wonderful place for grown-up human beings to work and relax. But it's not always the best of all possible worlds for children. Deep in our hearts we all know it, but we're frightened to admit it. The world we've created is damaging our children's brains. Written by Sue Palmer, a leading educational consultant and author of over 200 books. Toxic Childhood discusses the impact today's lifestyle has on child development. It has sparked debate about the way children live and how the modern world affects them physically and mentally.
The teachers that I work with all over the country were all coming up with the same points, that children's attention was poorer, that they've got poorer listening skills, and that their language was declining. There's a lot more of what you call the developmental conditions, ADHD, high-functioning autism, dyslexia and so on. These are all to do with children's development and they're not happening on schedule. So I began to wonder, could these various cultural side effects that we've got from all the changes that have happened in the last 20 years, could we have created a culture in which development is hindered in some way? The research that I did, in the end, I broke it down into 10 areas. There was diet, lack of play, lack of sleep, difficulties with communication because children's talk isn't being developed as well as it was, family changing and childcare changes, and indeed many changes in education, which is getting much more pressurised for young children. But then you got into the area of growing up in an electronic village, and that affects children through marketing influences, but also because they're spending more time in the electronic village, many of them, than they spend in real life encounters, not getting first-hand experiences. And then there's been changes, huge changes in parenting. Now, all of these swirl together. It's not as if you can point the finger at one thing and say, well, that's the cause. I mean, there were certain things, I think, that came out as being specifically implicated in almost every chapter. And one of those, I would say, was the movement of TVs into children's bedrooms, because that means that children are now watching far more alone. They're much more susceptible to marketing, grooming, and the parents don't know what they're watching. They're not mediating, and they're not being involved in the same activities as their children. We think that they're watching their children's channels, we'll tut up happily watching Balamory, but actually children, they're very curious and they tend to channel hop. And I think one of the most destabilising things for kids is actually the news. I sometimes wonder what it must have been like if you were an 8-year-old kid sitting in your bedroom watching the Beslan school siege being reported. These things are quite terrifying to adults, but extraordinarily destabilising to children who don't understand that, there's time and space. As far as they're concerned, it's happening down the road. There's a real problem coming up in the future. The immediate problem to me is get the televisions out of the bedrooms and try and make sure that parents across the social classes know of the damage that it can be doing to their children. And I think we've got to look as a society at what we want our children to be seeing, what we want them to be experiencing, and how we can make sure that we limit the bad stuff that's going out to kids. We've got huge numbers of children now with developmental conditions which did not exist until 25, 30 years ago. In America, in the early 80s, it was 1 in 50,000 kids diagnosed with autism. In 2004, it was 1 in 166. And the American Academy of Pediatrics was reckoning it's going up by 25% per year. Now, okay, this is increased diagnosis, the medical people have got better, but that sort of increase is not just increased diagnosis. Something is going on. Same with attention deficit, the same with the dysfunctions, dysgraphia, dyslexia, dyspraxia. Our children's lives are changing, and it's interfering with their development. everybody that works with children has got a responsibility, because we're bringing up the next generation. And producers of children's content are hugely significant and important in the way they influence kids. I think they've got a responsibility to avoid things like montage telly, when you're cutting and cutting and cutting, which does appear to be contributing to attention deficit. I think you've got a responsibility in terms of the content of programming, and I think there's a huge responsibility not to send them off on some sort of website treasure hunt where they're clicking from one website to another and you're just moving them from one type of passive sedentary entertainment to another. Children learn from first-hand experience and from first-hand interaction with human beings, and that's where we've got to be pointing them from the content that's provided back into the real world and the real people. The old saying of it takes a village to raise a child is true, and it's not just done in the family, it's done by the whole community. But this is the first generation that's grown up full-time, 24/7, in an electronic village. A very, very different village from any village that's ever existed before. We've got to make sure that there's real responsibility in terms of looking after the vulnerable, and the most vulnerable of the lot are the kids. We've got to get back to real food, real play, real interaction and first-hand experience. If we don't do that, I think we hazard the development of children's brains. We are the same creatures that we have been for millennia. We need the same basic experiences in early life in order for the brain to develop the neural connections to happen that are going to make us able to function and able to become the civilised, sophisticated creatures that keep this show on the road. Now, if we are denying our children those experiences, well, they might not be bright or balanced enough to keep it going.